In this video, I'm going to be reviewing the 2019 Giant TCX Advance Pro 1. So this is a pro-level cyclocross race bike that can also double as a gravel bike. Now, I've had the 2018 version. I've done a review on that. There's not a lot that's changed between the 2018 and the 2019, so I'm not going to go into extreme detail on this review. But there are some things about the TCX that I've really come to appreciate over the past few years. I've had several models, so this is obviously the latest one. So let's look up close at this bike and again talk about some of the features that I like and go into a little bit of the components on the bike. Now, I'll first say that I typically clean my bikes before I review them, but since this is a cyclocross race bike and I just had a race yesterday, I figured I would leave the mud on it from yesterday's race while I'm reviewing it. I'll first talk about the geometry of the bike. Nothing has changed in the geometry over the past few years of the Giant TCX. This frame is almost identical to the 2018 except for the new graphics. So let's first of all talk about the bottom bracket height, because this bike has a higher bottom bracket than a lot of other cyclocross bikes that I've seen. This is the European style of geometry, which is the higher bottom bracket. The American style cyclocross bike geometry has a bottom bracket that's a little bit lower. So on paper, some people may look at the bottom bracket height of this bike and say that it's a little bit too high. However, I've actually really come to appreciate this on cyclocross race courses. I'm not sure about the courses that you would have access to, but here, even though we don't have a lot of really long climbs, we do have steep climbs, but more importantly, off-camber sections. So those off-camber sections are where you really appreciate the high bottom bracket because you're pedaling on a sideways hill. And just yesterday, there were several off-camber sections, and I was thinking about the bottom bracket height as I'm going around those corners, knowing that I'd be doing this review soon. And my pedal was just clearing the grass when I was pedaling around those off-camber sections. And so honestly, I appreciate the higher bottom bracket. The disadvantage of a higher bottom bracket is the fact that the bike may feel a little bit more tipsy, and then you've got to jump just a tad higher to jump back on the saddle when you're remounting the bike. But honestly, that's something that you get used to very quickly. And I'm going to talk about how this bike does as a gravel bike, because a lot of people out there are looking at this wondering if it's going to be a good gravel bike. So I'll talk about that. But the high bottom bracket to me does not hinder the capabilities on gravel at all. Another nice thing about the higher bottom bracket is if you ride this bike on single track, which I do sometimes, it is able to clear logs and things a little bit easier. The tires for the 2019 bike are a little bit different. Let's get some mud off these tires and see if we can see the name here. So these are the Maxxis all-terrains, and this is my first year using these tires. Okay, it's there somewhere. And I actually really like these. They have really good grip. They're not the lowest rolling resistant tire when you're on pavement, but this is a cyclocross race bike, and if you wanted to use it for gravel, you would want to change out the tires. And so these tires are good. I run them tubeless. All Giant bikes today come tubeless ready. In fact, they don't even include tubes. So they give you sealant with the bike, so you just add your sealant, air them up, and they hold really well. Now, Giant rims, like I said, they are tubeless ready. They are a little bit harder to get the tires unseated out of the bead of the rim. However, with cyclocross bikes, that's not a bad thing at all, because I've actually seen tires blow off rims on G-outs. Since these lock in really well, you have the extra security of knowing that's not going to happen. Now, I run these tires probably about 27, 28 in the back and about 25, 26 in the front. And that gives me plenty of grip. Also allows the tire to conform over the bumps a little bit better. Since they're tubeless, you don't have to worry about a pinch flat, so you can run the little bit lower tire pressure. And while we're talking about tires, let's go ahead and talk about tire clearance, because I want to go into how this bike rides as a gravel bike. And like I've said before, the Giant TCX has absolutely tons of tire clearance. I've run 40C tires on this bike and still have plenty of room for clearance. So that's what makes this bike a good gravel bike. Now, this frame won't be quite as comfortable as a full-on gravel frame for a couple reasons. One is carbon gravel frames today are built with a little bit more compliance because hard acceleration and braking is not as important. Also, the geometry on this bike is going to be a tad bit steeper, so it's not going to be quite as stable on like a high-speed descent. Now, that being said, I've spent many miles on a Giant TCX on gravel roads and have had no complaints at all. So the frame being a tad bit stiffer, you're not going to feel quite as fresh after a really long gravel ride, so 3, 4, 5 hours or more. But for kind of the 2-hour range or less, you're not going to notice too much of a difference in terms of kind of how you feel. Another consideration for using a cyclocross bike is the gear range. So almost all cyclocross race bikes today come with a 1x system. Now the Giant does come with, I think it's a 1236 cassette in the back, so you have a little bit more range than some bikes that would come with a 1232. Low end range on a gravel road, I don't think you're going to have an issue unless you're just climbing like a 15 to 20% grade gravel climb. I think you're going to have plenty of low end gear. It's the top end that you are going to be a little bit limited on this bike, so I'd think about 30 miles an hour pedaling is where you'll start to spin out. So just take that into consideration if you want to use this for gravel. Now Giant has just come out this year with their new gravel bike, the Giant Revolt. And that frame, like I said, is going to have a little bit slacker geometry, probably going to be built with a little bit more compliance. It's a bike that I want to get my hands on to test ride. I have not been able to do so yet. But I was talking to a buddy yesterday at the cyclocross race, and we were talking about the difference between a cyclocross and gravel bike. And I told him something that I've come to realize over the years, and that is, if I were going to have one bike and I was going to race cross and ride gravel, I would actually lean towards the cross bike because of the way it handles on a cross course. A gravel bike on a cross course is going to be a little bit harder to manage. So at slow speeds, a slacker geometry gravel frame is going to feel just a little bit floppy. I like the way a cyclocross bike feels on gravel more than I like the way a gravel bike feels on a cyclocross course, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's what I wanted to mention as far as gravel riding, because like I said, I know a lot of people are going to be thinking about that. Let's look at some of the components of the bike before I wrap up the video. First of all, the saddle. This saddle is very comfortable. Saddles are hit and miss. I mean, everybody's different. Everybody has different preferences. There have been a couple Giant saddles that I've not liked. This is one that I do like. I mean, it's lightweight. It's got a nice design. Giant also has a really cool feature. They have a rear tail light that I'm going to probably install because they gave me one to try out. And it's a tail light that kind of fits in this section, which is really nice because you don't have to find a place on the frame or seat post to clamp it on. It just goes right there. So that's really cool, especially if you're going to be riding gravel. So the SRAM Force components I love. I actually now prefer SRAM over Shimano for cyclocross racing. And so the SRAM Force, I also use SRAM Rival on my gravel bike, and the Force is just smoother. It's easier to shift, the SRAM Force. And the brakes work well. The only issue I've had with all SRAM road brakes is sometimes they require adjustment, more frequent adjustments than Shimano road brakes. But I have come to be able to adjust these really quickly. So that's just a kind of a note that you may want to think about. You probably want to get a little brake centering tool like the Birzman I reviewed. In fact, I'll link that below because that allows you to center your hydraulic brakes really quickly. Giant has their defuse seat post, which has a little bit of flex to it, and it works. So when you're on a bumpy cross course, the seat post will kind of bounce back and forth a little bit, give a little bit of compliance. The way that you adjust this, by the way, is it's got your wedge here, and that's how you would raise the seat post. And it's really important, by the way, to get this to the exact torque specs. So you don't want to over tighten a carbon seat post, but you don't want to under tighten it, because when you jump back on to remount, the seat post can slip. So I actually use some fiber grip, it's carbon grip paste, on the seat post, and I use a torque wrench, go exactly to 6 Newton meters, and that will allow the seat post again to not slip when you're jumping back on the bike. A few other things that I'll point out is this bike does come with 2 water bottle mounts, and so I take one off during cross season, so I just have one on there. But if you want to run 2 for gravel, you can do it. And as you can see, this bike does come with a chain guide, a little bit of extra security just to make sure that chain won't bounce off on a really bumpy cyclocross race course. So that'll wrap up my review of the 2019 Giant TCX Advance Pro 1. It is a pro level cyclocross race bike that can double as a gravel bike very easily. It's a very versatile bike. Now, of course, Giant does make some lower end carbon cyclocross bikes that are also very good. They have SRAM Rival or lower. and aluminum rims. Now I've said before that aluminum rims are great on gravel because they're a little bit more comfortable. They're a little bit heavier and not quite as snappy in the handling and the acceleration, but for long-term comfort, they are comfortable. So if you're not going to be cyclocross racing very much and you want a versatile bike that can also ride gravel, the Advance Pro 2 is also a really good option. So questions or comments that you have about this bike or this review, drop them below. Thank you for watching.